Hello, I'm Samantha, and after 25 years of marriage, my husband spiked my drink at our Christmas party, but he drank it himself. Imagine standing there, seeing the man you trusted for decades, the father of your children, doing something so vile. What happens when the man you loved tries to take everything from you? Your dignity, your inheritance, your life. The pain, the anger, it builds up, and one day, it explodes. But what he didn't see coming was me. It was time to take control, time to expose the truth. So why did I let him get away with it for so long? You won't believe what happens next. The house was filled with Christmas lights, the warmth of the season hanging in the air like a fragile mask. Outside, snow drifted lazily down, blanketing the world in a cold silence. Inside, Miss Samantha sat in the middle of her suburban home in New York City, surrounded by her family. It was Christmas Eve, a night meant for celebration, yet there was an unspoken tension that clung to every corner of the room. The faint hum of holiday music played in the background, but it only seemed to underscore the hollow emptiness she felt inside. She had spent years creating this home, pouring her heart and soul into making it a place of comfort and belonging for her husband, Marcus, and their 3 children. She was a retired schoolteacher, a mother who had sacrificed so much. And yet, in the midst of the festive decorations and laughter, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was invisible. Over the years, she had become a ghost in her own life, her contributions overlooked, her efforts unappreciated. It was as if her family had forgotten her worth. "Mom, pass the gravy," her youngest son, Jamal, said as he helped himself to the food laid out on the table, his tone casual, indifferent. Samantha smiled weakly, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the gravy boat. She had worked tirelessly to make this meal special. She had hoped for a moment of connection, for something that might ease the ache of being unnoticed. But instead, her family continued their quiet gossip, their eyes avoiding hers as if she were a burden. The tension was palpable, so thick it felt like it could choke her. She pushed the sadness aside, focusing instead on making the evening as pleasant as possible. She smiled as she passed the gravy to Jamal, hoping that maybe, just maybe, this Christmas would be different. Then, it happened. Marcus, her husband of 25 years, stood up. His face, usually so warm and affectionate, now twisted with a coldness she had never seen before. He cleared his throat, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. The air seemed to freeze, and all eyes turned to him, waiting. "Listen up," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the chatter like a knife. 25 years is enough. I want someone younger. I want you out of the apartment tomorrow." The words hit Samantha like a slap in the face, her heart sinking into her stomach. The room fell silent, the festive sounds of Christmas replaced by a heavy, suffocating quiet. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She stared at Marcus, her husband, the man she had spent more than half her life with. His words were sharp, cruel, and everything she had feared but never expected. Her children stared at the floor, not knowing how to react. The guests at the party exchanged awkward glances, unsure of how to handle the situation. The laughter that had filled the room earlier was now replaced by the sound of nervous whispers. Samantha's face burned, but she didn't cry, not yet. The humiliation was deep, but she held her ground, refusing to let them see the pain. Her thoughts raced. Her hands clenched into fists under the table, but she stayed calm, calculating her next move. Marcus was lying. She knew that deep down, she knew. The apartment was legally hers. He had no right to kick her out. But the betrayal stung nonetheless. As the silence stretched on, Samantha felt a shift inside her. The deep sadness that had gripped her heart for years began to stir something else. A quiet, seething anger. She wasn't going to let him do this. She wasn't going to let him strip her of everything she had worked for. Not again. She stood up slowly, her hands still trembling, but her voice steady. She cleared her throat, letting the weight of the moment settle before she spoke. I've spent 25 years building this life with you, Marcus, but you seem to forget that this home is mine. You're the one who needs to leave. Her words hung in the air like a challenge, and the room went still. For a moment, it felt as if time had stopped. Marcus stood frozen, his face a mixture of shock and anger. The guests were silent, unsure of how to react. Samantha's children looked at her with wide eyes, unsure whether to support her or side with their father. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The room remained deathly quiet, and Samantha, for the first time in years, felt a flicker of control. The power dynamic had shifted. Her family had always seen her as the quiet, patient one, the one who took care of everything, the one who was always there. But tonight, Samantha was done being overlooked. She had spent too many years sacrificing her own happiness for the sake of others. Tonight, she was reclaiming her voice. The tension in the room was palpable. No one knew what to say, how to act. Her children shifted uncomfortably, their guilt palpable. Some of them exchanged glances, unsure whether they should speak up or stay silent. As the silence stretched on, an older relative, Aunt Gertrude, whispered softly, loud enough for everyone to hear. That hit harder than silence ever could. The comment hung in the air like a breath, breaking the tension just enough for the gravity of what had just happened to settle in. Samantha's words had landed like a punch, and everyone in the room could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her mind was clear. She had stood her ground, and for the first time in years, she felt powerful. But as the reality of the situation began to sink in, she knew there was no turning back. She had just opened a door, and what lay beyond it was unknown. But one thing was certain. She wasn't going to let Marcus, or anyone else, dictate her life anymore. I stood there, my heart pounding, knowing that this was just the beginning, she thought, her voice barely a whisper in the room. What happens next will define who I am, and I won't let anyone, especially not Marcus, dictate that. The morning after Christmas, the house felt eerily silent. The decorations still hung from the walls, the faint sparkle of the tree lights glimmering like a last attempt at cheer. But inside, there was no warmth, no joy, only the cold remnants of last night's confrontation. Samantha woke up with a heavy heart, her mind tangled in the events of the previous evening. The harshness of Marcus's words echoed in her ears. I want you out of the apartment tomorrow. She had hoped for peace this Christmas, but instead, she had been forced to confront a truth she had been avoiding for years. As she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind replayed the night in a constant loop. The humiliation, the shock, the painful clarity that Marcus didn't see her anymore. For years, she had sacrificed, nurtured, and cared for their family, and yet, in the end, it felt like it hadn't mattered. Her heart still ached, but something inside her had shifted. A quiet anger had replaced the sorrow, and the realization that she was no longer willing to remain silent began to take root. She wasn't going to let him do this to her. She wouldn't let him make her feel small again. It was a long time coming, but for the first time in ages, Samantha felt the fire of defiance building within her. She dragged herself out of bed and walked to the window, looking out over the snow-covered streets. The world outside was calm, peaceful, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside her. But she knew what she had to do. There was no going back now. Marcus had pushed her too far, and it was time to fight back. Samantha sat at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee, trying to steady her thoughts. She had never been one to make waves, always the dutiful wife, the one who kept the peace, who tried to make everyone happy. But that wasn't who she was anymore. She had spent far too many years hiding behind a smile, swallowing her pain, pretending that everything was fine. But it wasn't fine, and she couldn't keep pretending it was. Her phone buzzed on the table, breaking her train of thought. It was a message from Aisha, her youngest daughter. "Mom, I'm so sorry for what happened last night. I know Dad shouldn't have said that. But please don't let it tear you apart." Samantha read the message, her heart sinking. Aisha, like the rest of the family, didn't understand. She had heard the apology in Aisha's words, but it didn't feel real. She knew they were all uncomfortable, unsure of how to navigate the situation. But it wasn't enough. They wanted to fix things with a few kind words, to sweep it all under the rug. But this wasn't something that could be fixed with a simple apology. It was deeper than that. As she was about to put the phone down, another message came through, this time from her son, Devin. "Mom, I know things are tough, but you have to understand, Dad's been under a lot of pressure. It's not all his fault. We just need to keep the peace, okay?" Samantha's stomach churned. Keep the peace. Those words again. It was as if her children were more concerned with avoiding conflict than understanding the depth of what had just happened. She had spent years keeping the peace, being the quiet one who kept everything together. And for what? To be dismissed by her own flesh and blood? Her mind raced as frustration and sadness mingled with the ever-growing sense of betrayal. It wasn't just Marcus who had hurt her, it was her children too. She wasn't just a mother anymore. She was a woman, a person with needs, with feelings, and they didn't see her. Not really. Aisha called a few minutes later. "Mom, can we talk?" Samantha hesitated, then picked up the phone. "What's going on, Aisha?" "I just want to make sure you're okay," Aisha said, her voice soft. "I know things are hard right now, but maybe it's time to let go. Dad's been unhappy for a while. Maybe this is just how things are meant to be." The words stung more than Samantha expected. "Let him go," Aisha had said. She hadn't meant to hurt her, but the phrase hit like a sharp slap to the face. Let him go. She had already given him everything. She had built a life with Marcus, a family. And now, after everything, Aisha was telling her to just walk away. Her grip tightened around the phone. "Aisha, it's not that simple. You don't understand. You don't know what this feels like." "I'm sorry, Mom. I just want you to be happy." Samantha hung up the phone, the weight of her daughter's words heavy on her chest. She felt more alone than ever. The pain, the disappointment, it was all too much. Her children, though they loved her in their own way, didn't understand. They saw her as the strong one, the one who always held it together, but they didn't realize the toll it had taken on her. Samantha sat in silence for a moment, her thoughts swirling. But then, something changed. The anger, the hurt, it all began to fuel a new determination. She was done being passive. She was done being the one who was always expected to endure, to keep the peace. She wasn't going to let Marcus walk all over her anymore. She took a deep breath, wiped the tears from her eyes, and stood up. It was time for her to take control, not just for herself, but for her children too. They needed to see her strength, to know that she wasn't going to be a doormat any longer. She wasn't going to let them treat her this way. Later that day, she stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. She didn't recognize the woman staring back at her, but that was about to change. She had a plan. A plan to confront Marcus, to stand up for herself and for the life she had built. She wasn't going to let him destroy it. She wasn't going to let him destroy her. She was ready. Samantha walked into the living room where Marcus was sitting, looking as if nothing had happened. His casual demeanor, his ability to act as if the night before hadn't been a catastrophe, made her blood boil. "I need to talk to you," Samantha said, her voice steady but firm. Marcus looked up, surprised. "What's this about?" Samantha stood tall. refusing to let him see her fear. "I'm done. You've hurt me enough. I won't take it anymore. This house, this life, it's mine. If you want to leave, then go. But know this, Marcus, I won't be the one to leave." Marcus opened his mouth, no doubt to try to talk his way out of it, but Samantha wasn't having it. "You don't get to make me feel small anymore. You don't get to decide my worth." Marcus's face twisted into anger. "You're overreacting." "I was just joking, Samantha." But the words fell flat. They meant nothing anymore. All the pain she had swallowed for years had boiled over, and Samantha was no longer the passive woman who had silently suffered. The confrontation continued, each word sharper than the last, but Samantha held her ground, unyielding, determined. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of the truth. Finally, with a steady breath, she looked Marcus in the eye and said, "If you want to walk away from this family, then go. But know this, I'm done pretending. I'll never be the same again." The morning was eerily quiet. The house, usually filled with the sounds of bustling activity, felt strangely empty. The familiar hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of traffic outside were the only things that reminded Samantha that the world was still turning. Inside, however, it felt like everything had stopped. She woke up early, as she always did, her mind already awake before her body. The weight of the events from the previous days hung heavily in the air, and as she sat on the edge of the bed, she could feel it pressing down on her chest. The anger, the shame, the heartbreak, it was all still there, swirling around in her mind. But something else was there too, a quiet determination. She wasn't going to let Marcus win this time. Samantha closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She thought back to the first time Marcus betrayed her trust. It had been years ago, long before the shouting matches, the silent treatments, the broken promises. She remembered the exact moment when things started to shift, when Marcus first turned cold. The warning signs had always been there, small things that she ignored. A look, a word, a tone. But over time, those things grew, and before she knew it, they had taken over her life. As she sat there, her mind replaying the past, she realized that the man she had been married to wasn't the same person she had fallen in love with. His actions had been escalating for years, and she had allowed herself to be blind to it. No more. The woman who had once been so strong, so independent, had allowed herself to be suffocated by him. But that was over now. Her heart still ached from the humiliation of the previous night, but the pain was no longer the defining emotion. Instead, a new feeling had taken root: empowerment. It was time to stop letting Marcus control her. It was time to stop letting her family see her as weak. She had been the strong one for so long, but now it was time to show them just how strong she truly was. Her thoughts were interrupted when she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. She knew who it was before she even looked up. Devin, her eldest son. He had been quiet the night before, standing at the sidelines of the confrontation with Marcus, unsure of where to place his loyalty. "Mom, can we talk?" His voice was soft, tentative. He always had this way of approaching her, as if he feared upsetting her. It made her heart ache a little, but she knew she couldn't let it deter her. "Of course, Devin." She didn't look up at him, but she could feel the weight of his gaze on her. There was a slight hesitation before he spoke again. "Are you sure this is the right way to handle this?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "I mean, maybe there's a way to work things out, right? You've been together for so long. Shouldn't you try to fix this?" Her heart sank. He didn't get it. Of course he didn't. He'd never seen what she had seen, never felt the years of silent resentment and hidden pain. He didn't know the toll it had taken on her. She turned to face him, her voice steady but firm. "Devin, you don't understand. This isn't about fixing things anymore. This is about me taking control of my own life. I can't keep pretending that everything is fine. I won't." Devin's face fell, and for a moment he looked like a little boy again, unsure of what to say. "But, Mom, I just don't want you to be hurt." The sincerity in his voice hit her harder than she expected, but she didn't allow herself to soften. "Not now. I'm already hurt, Devin. And it's not just from Marcus. It's from you and your sister. You don't see me. Not really. You see the woman who has always kept things together, but you don't see the person I am. You've never asked me how I feel, what I want." His silence was deafening, and in that moment she realized that he, like the rest of them, had always viewed her as a fixture in the background. A mother, a wife, not a person, not a woman with her own needs, her own dreams, her own desires. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said quietly, before turning and walking out of the room. Samantha sat there for a long time after he left, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had always done her best for them, raised them, protected them, loved them, but it was never enough. It would never be enough, not if she wasn't allowed to be more than just their mother. The tears came then, unbidden and unwelcome, but they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of release. For too long she had been carrying the burden of others' expectations. Now it was time to put that weight down. She stood up from the bed and walked to the mirror, her reflection staring back at her with a look she hadn't seen in years. A look of strength, a look of determination. She wasn't the woman she had been, and that was okay. She wasn't going to let Marcus dictate her life anymore. When Marcus came home that evening, he found her sitting in the living room, waiting for him. She had changed out of her pajamas, her hair pulled back into a neat bun, and there was a firmness in her posture that he hadn't seen before. He walked in, his usual smug expression on his face, and stopped when he saw her. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice laced with annoyance. Samantha didn't flinch. "I'm done," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "I've spent 25 years of my life with you, but I'm not going to spend another minute pretending that I don't deserve better." Marcus laughed, the sound hollow and dismissive. "You've gone too far now." "I'm not going to be controlled." But Samantha wasn't afraid. Not anymore. "You're not controlling me anymore, Marcus. I'm taking control of my life, and you're not going to stop me." His eyes widened in disbelief, and for the first time in years, Samantha saw fear in his eyes. He didn't know what to do with her now. She wasn't the same woman he had married. "Fine," he spat, his face twisted with anger. "You can think whatever you want, but this family's mine, and I'm not going anywhere." Samantha stood up, meeting his gaze with a steady confidence that sent a chill down his spine. "If you want to leave, then go. But know this, I'm done pretending. I'll never be the same again." She watched him leave the room, his shoulders tense with anger, but he didn't say another word. Samantha felt a sense of quiet triumph wash over her, but it was still too soon to say if she had won. Her children's words echoed in her mind, and she knew the fight was far from over. The tension in the house was thick, and the truth was that there was no going back. But for the first time in years, Samantha felt a spark of hope. She was taking control. The battle wasn't over, but she was ready to face whatever came next. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the living room. The house, once filled with the tension of the past few days, now felt oddly quiet. No shouting, no arguments, just a deep, heavy silence that filled the space. It was as though the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. Samantha sat in her favorite chair by the window, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She hadn't moved much since she woke up, her mind replaying the events of the past week. There was something about the calm that unsettled her, this eerie stillness before the storm. The fight with Marcus, the confrontations, the choices she had made. They were all behind her now, but the weight of them lingered. She thought back to the moment when everything had started to change. When she had finally stood up to Marcus, when she had refused to take the constant disrespect any longer. The relief that had washed over her in that instant was now tempered with doubt. What came next? Where did she go from here? It wasn't enough to simply stand up for herself. She needed a plan. She needed a way out. Samantha closed her eyes, her mind drifting to a time long ago. A time before Marcus had worn her down, before she had allowed herself to become his second priority, his doormat. She remembered who she used to be, the confident woman who didn't settle, who fought for what she believed in. She had seen the world as her oyster back then, full of possibilities. But somewhere along the way, she had forgotten that woman. She had sacrificed so much, so often, that the person she was before had become nothing but a distant memory. The flashback hit her like a bolt of lightning, awakening something inside her that had been dormant for too long. She wasn't just Marcus's wife. She wasn't just the mother of his children. She was Samantha. She was strong. And she could be that person again. A mix of determination and a slight undercurrent of fear rose within her. She knew the hardest part was yet to come. She was standing at a crossroads, and she had no idea which path to take. But she couldn't stay stuck in the past. Not anymore. The stillness in the house was interrupted by the sound of footsteps. It was Marcus, back from his morning run. His presence was like a storm cloud, dark and threatening. Despite everything that had happened, despite the way he had treated her, he still seemed unfazed, calm, detached. It was infuriating, and yet there was something about his demeanor that sent a chill down her spine. She didn't look at him as he walked into the room. He paused, his eyes scanning her face as if searching for something. "You're quiet today," he remarked, his tone light, almost casual. "I was thinking maybe we could talk. You know, about how things are going to be from now on." Samantha felt the old, familiar surge of resentment bubbling up. She knew what he was doing, trying to soothe her with his fake kindness, pretending everything could just go back to normal. She wasn't stupid. She knew better than to fall for his manipulation again. But the words he spoke were carefully chosen, crafted to make her doubt herself, to make her question whether her actions were justified. "Everything's going to be fine," he continued, as if trying to convince himself. "We can make this work, Samantha. I'm sorry about what happened the other night. Let's just move forward, all right?" She forced herself to stay calm, to let his words wash over her without reacting. But inside, her anger was simmering. She knew that this was just another attempt to take control of the situation, to paint over the cracks with a thin veneer of false hope. He wasn't sorry. He was scared. Scared that he was losing the hold he had on her. "I don't think things can just go back to how they were, Marcus," she said slowly, her voice steady. "We can't pretend anymore." His eyes narrowed, the mask slipping for a moment. "What are you talking about?" Samantha met his gaze, unflinching. "I'm talking about everything. You, me, us. It's over. You've had your chance, and now it's my turn to decide what happens next." For a moment, there was silence between them. Marcus was taken aback, clearly not expecting her to be so direct. The words hung in the air like a weight, too heavy for either of them to ignore. But then, as if to regain control, Marcus laughed, a cold, humorless laugh. "You're serious, aren't you?" "I've never been more serious in my life," Samantha replied, her voice steady, unwavering. She could see the shift in his posture, the subtle change in his demeanor. He wasn't used to her standing up to him, not like this. And for a moment, just a moment, she could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He hadn't expected her to fight back. The tension in the room was palpable, thick with unspoken words. Samantha felt the weight of the moment. knowing that this was the turning point. There was no going back now. She wasn't just standing up to him, she was standing up for herself. Just as she was about to say something else, the phone rang. It was a call from Aisha, her youngest daughter. Samantha didn't even hesitate. She picked up the phone, her heart heavy as she listened to the familiar voice on the other end. "Mom, I need to talk to you," Aisha said, her tone serious. "I know things have been crazy lately, but I just wanted you to know that I'm here for you, whatever you need." Samantha's throat tightened as she listened, the weight of her daughter's words sinking in. Aisha had always been quiet, reserved, but now it seemed like she was stepping up, ready to support her mother in ways that Samantha hadn't expected. As she hung up the phone, a part of her felt a little lighter, but another part of her still felt the heaviness of the decision ahead. Her children were divided, their loyalties torn. Some sided with Marcus, some, like Aisha, were on her side. But it didn't matter. She had to do what was right for her. Marcus's footsteps echoed in the hallway, his presence a constant reminder of the battle that was brewing between them. Samantha stood up, taking a deep breath. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let Marcus, or anyone, control her life any longer. As she looked out the window, the calm before the storm felt deafening. But it was only temporary. The storm was coming, and when it did, Samantha would be ready. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting a soft glow across the living room. It was quiet. Too quiet. A stark contrast to the chaos that had enveloped the house just days before. Samantha sat on the couch, her hands resting on her lap, her mind racing through the events that had led her to this moment. She had spent years staying silent, swallowing her hurt, enduring Marcus's cruelty. But now, the silence felt heavy. It felt suffocating, as though it was closing in on her, threatening to crush her under its weight. The confrontation with Marcus had been the first step in breaking free, but it was just the beginning. The real battle was yet to come. She closed her eyes and thought back to the person she used to be. The woman who made decisions without hesitation, who didn't shy away from difficult choices. That woman had been confident, independent. She had made her own way in the world, without needing anyone's approval. But somewhere along the way, life had worn her down. She had put others first, her family, her husband, her children. She had sacrificed pieces of herself, and in doing so, she had lost sight of who she was. But now, as she sat in the quiet of the morning, she remembered that woman. She remembered her strength. The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface was beginning to rise again, mixing with a deep sense of resolve. No more pretending, no more letting Marcus walk all over her. The time for silence had passed. Marcus's words echoed in her mind, his attempts to dismiss her, to control her with promises of change, with gestures meant to make her feel indebted. He had given her gifts, but they had always been weapons wrapped in ribbons. His manipulations were subtle, but she could see through them now. A part of her had always known what he was doing, but now the veil had been lifted. The realization hit her hard. Marcus wasn't going to change. He wasn't going to apologize. He was never going to treat her with the respect she deserved. He would never see her as an equal. And in that moment, she made a decision. It was time to break the silence. She wouldn't wait for him to change. She couldn't. She wasn't going to allow him to control her any longer. She thought about the conversation they had shared just a few days ago, when she had stood up to him. It had felt like a small victory, but deep down, she knew there was still so much more to be done. The next step was clear. She had to take control of her life, not just for herself, but for her children too. Samantha's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Marcus entering the house. His footsteps were heavy, almost deliberate, as though he were trying to make his presence known. She didn't turn to face him. though she could feel him standing just behind her. "You know," he began, his voice smooth like honey, "I've been thinking about what we talked about. Maybe we could try again. We could work this out." Samantha felt her stomach tighten. He always came at her like this, charming, smooth, making her feel like it was all her fault. His words were empty. She could hear the manipulation in his tone, even as he tried to mask it with sweetness. "I'm not interested in working this out," she said, her voice firm. "I've spent enough time pretending, Marcus. I can't do it anymore. I won't." There was a pause. She could feel the shift in the air, the tension thickening between them. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, she heard him move around the room, the sound of his footsteps pacing back and forth. Finally, he spoke again, his voice colder this time. "You don't understand, Samantha. You're making a mistake. You can't just walk away from everything we've built together." Her heart pounded in her chest. The audacity, the nerve. He still thought he could control her, manipulate her into believing that he was the only one who had a say in their future. "I'm not making a mistake," she said, standing up. She turned to face him, her eyes meeting his with a defiance she had never shown before. "I've been silent for too long, but not anymore. I'm taking control of my life, and you can't stop me." The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. There was no turning back now. She had made her decision. Just then, her phone rang, breaking the moment. She looked at the caller ID. It was Aisha, her daughter. Samantha hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Mom." Aisha's voice came through the phone, strained but determined. "I just wanted to say that I'm proud of you. I know things have been tough, but you're doing the right thing. I'm here for you, whatever you need." Samantha felt a lump form in her throat. Aisha had always been quiet, reserved, but now her daughter was standing with her. She wasn't alone. "Thank you, Aisha," Samantha said, her voice thick with emotion. "I need to do this. I have to take control of my life, for all of us." Aisha's voice softened. "Just be careful, Mom. Don't let him tear you down again." Samantha took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I won't. I promise." As she hung up, the reality of what she had to do sank in. She couldn't go back to the way things were. She couldn't stay in a marriage that had suffocated her for so long. It was time to move forward, no matter what the cost. As the day went on, she found herself making arrangements, small steps toward her independence. She opened a bank account in her name, started looking for an apartment, and contacted a lawyer to begin the divorce process. For the first time in years, she felt like she was taking control of her future. But just as she was starting to feel a sense of relief, Marcus came to her again. He stood in the doorway, his face hard, his eyes narrowed. "You can't do this, Samantha," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You'll ruin everything. You'll lose everything. Your children, your family. You'll be alone." Samantha stood tall, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. "I'm already alone, Marcus. And if leaving you means losing everything, then so be it. I won't live a lie anymore." There was a long silence as Marcus stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, she thought he might say something else, try to manipulate her again. But instead, he just turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the middle of the room. Samantha stood there for a long time, her thoughts swirling. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that there was no turning back. The silence was finally broken. Now, all that was left was the fight. The late afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. It had been a week since Samantha made the bold decision to take control of her life. The house felt quieter now, the stillness hanging in the air, charged with the energy of what was to come. She had lived in silence for too long. Now, she was preparing for the final confrontation. Samantha stood in front of the mirror, studying her reflection. She wasn't the woman she once was. The soft smile that once graced her face had been replaced with a hard edge, a new sense of resolve in her eyes. She could feel it in her bones. This was the moment she had been working toward. No more hesitations, no more pretending. She was done being manipulated, done being silenced. As she stood there, her mind drifted back to a time when she had been younger, brimming with confidence and a fire that couldn't be extinguished. She remembered the days before Marcus, when she had made tough decisions without second-guessing herself. Life had been hers to shape, her future in her own hands. She wasn't just a wife and mother back then. She was someone with goals, ambitions, and dreams. But those years had been buried under layers of sacrifice, of taking care of everyone else, of putting her needs last. Those memories, the woman she had been, had faded over time. But today, she remembered. Today, she was ready to reclaim that strength. Her heart raced with a mix of calm determination and lingering fear. She was ready for this. She had to be. But as she thought about what would happen next, doubt crept in. What if she was making a mistake? What if her decision would tear her family apart? She pushed those thoughts aside. This was her life, and she would no longer let Marcus, or anyone, control it. Marcus, however, wasn't going to let her go without a fight. As much as she had taken control of her own life, she knew that he would do whatever it took to regain the upper hand. That evening, when Marcus walked in, she could feel the shift in the air. He didn't say much at first. His presence was calm, almost too calm, as if he were waiting for something, waiting for her to break. He cleared his throat and spoke softly, but there was an edge to his voice. "Samantha, we need to talk. I'm sorry for everything. I've been a fool. You know I love you. I've just been confused." Samantha's stomach turned. His words were rehearsed, too perfect, too calculated. He wasn't sorry. He was trying to regain control. She had seen this act before, Marcus's attempts to play the victim, to make her feel guilty for wanting something more, for wanting peace. He thought his charm could win her back. "I don't need your apologies, Marcus," Samantha said, her voice firm but steady. "I've heard them all before." "It's not enough anymore." He looked taken aback, his lips pressing into a tight line as he took a step closer. "Samantha, don't do this. We've been through too much. Our history, our family. You can't just throw that all away." "Why not?" she asked, her words cutting through the thick tension. "Why can't I throw it away? I've been carrying this weight for too long. You've controlled me for years, Marcus. I won't let you do it anymore. Not today. Not ever again." His eyes widened, his mask of calm beginning to crack. He didn't expect this. He didn't expect her to stand up to him, not like this, not with such resolve. His jaw clenched, and for a moment the room was thick with his anger. "You think you can just walk away from all of this? From me?" Samantha stood her ground. "Yes, I can. And I will." His voice dropped to a whisper, but it was laced with venom. "You'll regret this, Samantha. You'll lose everything, the family, the life you've built. You'll be alone. And I'll make sure of it." His words hit her like a slap, but they didn't faze her. She had heard his threats before, but now they didn't have the power they once did. She knew what she had to do, and she was ready for it. But then, as if he had been waiting for just the right moment, Marcus dropped the bombshell. "You think you have control?" he sneered. "You have nothing. I could ruin your career. You know I have connections. I could make sure you never work again." The weight of his words hit Samantha like a punch to the gut. This was the man she had trusted, the man who knew her every secret, the man she had shared everything with. And now he was threatening to destroy her, to take everything from her, just to keep her in his grasp. For a moment, Samantha felt the sting of betrayal wash over her, the pain of knowing that someone she had loved so deeply could be so cruel. But then, something in her shifted. The fear and doubt that had been lingering in the back of her mind faded. She had taken enough from him. She wasn't going to let him control her any longer. Samantha stood taller, her chin raised with defiance. "You think you can threaten me with that?" she said, her voice low but unwavering. "You don't scare me anymore, Marcus. I've already taken steps to protect myself. I've started the process. There's nothing you can do to stop me now." Marcus froze, his face going pale. He had thought he had the upper hand, but now, for the first time in a long while, the tables had turned. "I've already talked to a lawyer," Samantha continued, "and I've made sure that my future is secure. You can't take that away from me. You can't control me anymore." The shock on Marcus's face was enough to make Samantha smile, just for a moment. It was a small victory, but it was hers. She had finally taken back control. But Marcus wasn't done. He opened his mouth, ready to unleash another round of threats, but Samantha didn't let him. "I don't need to hear it," she said, her voice calm but firm. "The games are over, Marcus. You've lost. It's time for me to move on." As Marcus stood there, stunned, Samantha turned and walked out of the room. She had made it this far. Now there was no turning back. She had broken the silence, and she was finally free. The evening had fallen heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. The house was eerily still, the only sound the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Samantha sat in her living room, the dim light of a single lamp casting long shadows against the walls. It was the calm before the storm. She could feel it in her bones. The moment she'd been dreading, yet anticipating, was finally here. She'd made her decision, and now it was time to face the consequences. She sat on the couch, staring at the floor, her mind a swirl of emotions, calm, yet turbulent. She had been silent for too long. She had allowed herself to shrink for everyone else's comfort, but no more. The woman she used to be, the confident woman who stood up for herself without hesitation, was emerging again, and this time she wasn't going to let anyone, especially Marcus, hold her back. As her gaze lingered on her reflection in the dark window, memories flooded her mind. Memories of a time when she had been fearless, the younger version of herself who knew how to navigate life's obstacles with strength and grace, who could stand her ground without second-guessing. That version of her had been buried for too long under layers of compromise, but now it was time to dig her out. The thought of what she was about to do made her heart pound in her chest, but there was no turning back. This was the moment she'd been building up to for years. Marcus, on the other hand, was still trying to hold on to the power he had over her. The last few days had been a game of cat and mouse. He'd tried every trick in the book to manipulate her. Guilt trips, charm, empty promises. But Samantha wasn't fooled anymore. His latest attempt came earlier that day, when he handed her an expensive necklace, his face a perfect mask of regret. "I'm sorry, Sam," he had said, his voice soft, as if trying to win her back with fake vulnerability. "I never meant to hurt you. I want to fix this." The moment she held the necklace in her hands, the weight of his manipulation became clear. It was a gift, but it wasn't out of love. It was a tool to reassert control over her, to make her feel like she owed him something. She had smiled politely, but deep down, she knew it was another of his calculated moves. Marcus had no real remorse. His apology wasn't for her, it was for himself, a last-ditch effort to keep his life from falling apart. But Samantha wasn't going to let him use her any longer. The tears she had shed in silence, the moments she had allowed herself to be small, those days were over. And now, she was ready to take the fight to him. The moment she picked up the phone to call her lawyer was the moment she truly reclaimed her power. She was no longer the woman who waited in the shadows for things to change. She was taking control of her future. By the time Marcus made his next move, trying to twist the narrative and turn their friends against her, Samantha was ready. She knew his game. He was trying to make her the villain, trying to paint her as the unstable one, the one who didn't know what she was doing. But Samantha was stronger than that. She reached out to their mutual friends, calmly and confidently telling her side of the story. She wasn't going to play the victim. She wasn't going to let anyone else decide how her story would end. This was her narrative, and she was going to own it. Marcus's final attempt to regain control came with a vengeance. He filed a counterclaim, twisting the facts and painting himself as the victim of her unforgiving behavior. He even tried to use his charm, pulling strings with their social circles, trying to manipulate people into taking his side. But Samantha was already one step ahead. The lawyer's call came just as she was getting ready to face Marcus one last time. Her lawyer had secured the evidence they needed to win, proof of Marcus's infidelity, proof of his financial manipulations. The cards were now stacked in her favor. Samantha was no longer the woman who cowered in the face of threats. She was the woman who had the strength to fight for herself, and she wasn't going to let Marcus get away with it. The courtroom was the final battleground, and Samantha walked in with her head held high. Marcus, of course, was there, his expression a mixture of arrogance and fear. He thought he could charm his way through this. He thought he could manipulate the legal system the same way he had manipulated her for years. But Samantha had the upper hand now. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't hesitate. She stood tall, facing the judge and the gallery of witnesses, and delivered the final blow. Her words were measured but firm, recounting the years of deception and manipulation Marcus had subjected her to. She laid out the facts with precision, making it clear that Marcus had been playing a dangerous game for far too long. His face turned pale as the evidence against him was presented. He had no more excuses, no more lies to cover up the truth. The tables had turned, and Marcus's reputation crumbled in front of everyone. Samantha knew there was no turning back now. The moment she had been waiting for had arrived, and she had won. The power was hers. As the judge made the final ruling in her favor, Samantha allowed herself a quiet moment of triumph. She had fought for her freedom, for her dignity, and she had succeeded. She had broken free from the chains of her past and reclaimed the life that was hers to live. The journey had been long, and at times it felt like it might break her, but Samantha had emerged stronger. She had finally found the strength to silence the voices that had tried to hold her down, and she was ready to live her life on her terms. It was late at night. The house felt unnervingly quiet. The weight of the past few days hung heavy on Samantha's shoulders as she sat in her living room. Dim light from a lone lamp cast long shadows, illuminating only her thoughts, which were as clouded as the room. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation, the culmination of everything she'd been through. The legal battle, the emotional turmoil, the years of lies. Everything was leading to this. She felt calm, but inside, there was a storm of emotions. She had made it this far, but the final step seemed like the hardest. She had been tested in ways she never imagined, but there was no turning back now. This was her moment to take control of her life, to finally break free from the chains that had bound her for so long. Samantha leaned back in the chair, her mind drifting back to how this all started. The quiet compromises, the sacrifices she made, the countless times she swallowed her pride. She remembered the woman she used to be, the one who didn't settle, the one who stood tall. Somewhere along the way, she had given that up, but no more. Now, the woman she was becoming had nothing left to lose. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the quiet tensions settle around her like a thick blanket. Tomorrow would change everything. The path she had set herself on wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming her dignity, her worth. Tomorrow was the breaking point. As she sat in the stillness of her living room, the sound of the front door opening broke her reverie. Marcus had arrived. He was never far behind when she needed to confront him. He thought he still had control, that his charm and manipulative tactics would work, just like they always had. But she was ready this time. He walked in with a half smile, his usual casual charm in place. "Samantha, I've been thinking about things," he said, as though he were doing her some kind of favor. "I'm sorry. I never meant for things to get out of hand. We've been through so much together, and I just want to fix this." Samantha stood up, the calm surface hiding the anger simmering beneath. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You don't get to apologize anymore. You don't get to manipulate me, not this time." She looked him directly in the eye, a steady fire behind her gaze. Marcus looked taken aback, surprised by the change in her demeanor. He had expected her to break down, to cry, to let him back in with a few soft words and a heartfelt apology. But Samantha wasn't having it. She had been through too much to fall for his lies now. "I've seen the way you've treated me," she continued, her words measured, but each one landing like a punch. "The way you've twisted everything, used our family against me, made me believe I wasn't enough. I'm done with that. I'm done with you." The words were out, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was drowning. She felt lighter, stronger, as if she was finally being heard. Marcus's expression shifted from feigned concern to frustration. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice rising. "You're not thinking clearly. You're letting anger cloud your judgment." "No," Samantha replied. "I'm finally thinking clearly. I've been too quiet for too long. It's time for you to hear the truth." She took a breath, steadying herself. "You've destroyed everything we had, Marcus. I'm not going to sit here and pretend anymore." Marcus's frustration turned to desperation. He tried to regain control, but Samantha wouldn't let him. He was used to having the last word, to manipulating the situation in his favor. But this time, she was the one in control. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. For a moment, the only sound was the heavy thud of his retreating footsteps. But Samantha didn't flinch. She stood there, resolute. She knew this was just the beginning. The next day, the pressure mounted. Marcus wasn't done. He tried one final move, attempting to turn their mutual friends against her. He painted her as the villain, accusing her of betrayal, claiming that she was destroying their legacy. It was the same old playbook, just with different words. But Samantha wasn't fooled. She had seen his tricks 1,000 times, and she wasn't going to be the victim anymore. She picked up the phone, called their friends, and calmly laid out the truth. She spoke from a place of power, no longer the broken woman he had left behind. She told them everything, the lies, the manipulation, the years of abuse. She wasn't asking for their sympathy. She was telling them her side of the story, and she wasn't holding back. Marcus thought he could break her, but instead, he had made a mistake. The more he pushed, the more she dug in her heels. Samantha wasn't going to lose this time. The courtroom was the next battleground. Samantha knew the final confrontation would take place there, but she also knew she had the upper hand. Marcus had no idea what she was holding in her back pocket. The evidence, proof of his infidelity, his manipulation of their finances, was enough to bring him to his knees. And when her lawyer presented the documents, Marcus's face drained of color. The room was silent except for the rustle of papers, and Samantha's heart raced as she watched his reaction. It was over. But Marcus wasn't done yet. In one last desperate attempt, he tried to bribe witnesses, hoping to turn the tide in his favor. He thought money could buy him everything, but he didn't know Samantha. She had anticipated his every move. The bribe was intercepted, and once again, Marcus's attempt to manipulate the system was exposed for what it was. Samantha watched, calm but unwavering, as he crumbled. There was no satisfaction in his downfall, only a quiet, steady resolve. This had to happen, for her own peace, for her own future. She had spent so many years being controlled by him, but now it was time to break free. The final verdict came swiftly. Samantha walked out of the courtroom with her head high, her heart beating faster with each step. Marcus had lost, and she had won. It wasn't just the financial settlements that mattered. It was the fact that she had reclaimed her life. She was free. The world felt different now. For the first time in years, Samantha felt like she was finally stepping into her own future. The past was behind her, and nothing would hold her back anymore. The morning was peaceful, a soft sun creeping through the curtains. The air was still, and for the first time in a long while, Samantha felt at ease. The chaos that had consumed her life for so many years was now behind her, and she could finally breathe. There were no more lies to untangle, no more fears to battle. She was free. As she sat by the window, sipping her coffee, her thoughts drifted back to the storm that had been her life. The court case, the betrayal, the manipulation, it all seemed like a distant memory now. She had won, and the victory felt both sweet and surreal. But even as the tension of the past months began to fade, there was something deeper stirring within her. A quiet understanding that the real work was just beginning, rebuilding her life, reconnecting with the parts of herself that had been buried for so long. She wasn't just moving beyond Marcus, she was moving beyond the version of herself that had tolerated all of it. Looking through old journals, she found entries from years ago, memories of the woman she used to be, the woman who believed in love without compromise, who had trusted too easily. She flipped through the pages, noting how much she had changed. The old Samantha no longer existed, and that realization both saddened and empowered her. She had rebuilt herself piece by piece from the ground up. And though the past still cast a shadow, she was no longer bound by it. The weight of the transformation was heavy, but it wasn't crushing. It was the weight of a woman who had found her strength again. The court case was over, but the aftermath still loomed. The community had begun to react to Marcus's downfall. People who had once turned a blind eye, or worse, had taken his side, were now beginning to see the truth about him. Samantha felt a strange mix of validation and hurt as she read messages from old friends, people who had been swayed by Marcus's manipulation. One message stood out. It was from an old friend, someone she had once trusted, who now apologized for not believing her sooner. "I'm sorry for not seeing it," the message read. "I see now what he did to you, to all of us. I wish I'd been there for you." Samantha stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keys. Part of her wanted to respond with a sharp, "It's too late." But another part of her, the part that had learned to let go, softened. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes and thought about what she had learned. She had fought so hard for this moment of peace, and she knew that healing didn't come in a single reply or apology. It was a long journey. Her children had always been a point of pain for her. The manipulation from Marcus had divided them, caused rifts that seemed impossible to mend. But now, as the dust settled, Samantha began reaching out. Slowly, cautiously. They were older now, wiser, and they had seen the destruction Marcus had caused. She began to rebuild those relationships, one conversation at a time. One evening, as she sat with her eldest, a moment of quiet regret passed between them. "I was wrong," her child said, voice thick with emotion. "I should have seen it. I should have known what he was doing to you. To all of us. I'm sorry, Mom." Samantha's heart ached. She had never expected this apology, but it didn't feel like enough. She was hesitant to fully embrace the moment, unsure if she could let go of the past so easily. Still, she knew it was a start, a small step toward healing, not just for her child, but for herself. The next chapter of her life was about to unfold, but Marcus's name was far from absent. The media was beginning to catch wind of his downfall. His financial scandals, the emotional manipulation, all of it was coming to light. People who had once invested in him were pulling away, disillusioned by the truth. Samantha didn't take pleasure in his public humiliation, but she didn't deny the quiet satisfaction she felt. For so long, he had twisted the narrative to paint himself as the victim, while she had been the silent sufferer. Now, the truth was out there for everyone to see. One evening, as the news coverage intensified, she heard about a major investor who had been backing Marcus. The investor had suddenly pulled all support, citing the revelations that had come to light. Samantha couldn't help but let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. This was the justice she had been waiting for, the validation that had eluded her for so long. But even with Marcus facing consequences, there was a bittersweet taste in her mouth. The damage had been done. No amount of public retribution could undo the years of hurt. One last confrontation with Marcus loomed on the horizon. He called her, desperate to salvage whatever shred of reputation he had left. He tried again to manipulate her, offering a hollow apology, but Samantha was done. She had no more time for his lies. "I'm not the woman I was when you first met me," she said calmly, standing in her living room, the weight of everything in her voice. "You no longer have any power over me. I've moved on, and so should you." Marcus stammered, trying to regain control. But Samantha's resolve was unshakable. With one final glance at him, she walked away. The past was behind her, and Marcus was no longer a part of her life. Samantha knew this was the last time she would ever have to face him. She was free, completely free. The chains that had held her, the fear that had kept her small, everything was gone. But the future was still unwritten. Samantha wasn't done yet. She had taken her pain and turned it into something meaningful. She started a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping women who had suffered through the kind of manipulation and abuse she had endured. She had found her voice, and now she was using it to empower others. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every woman who had been silenced, every person who had been made to feel less than. Samantha was no longer the victim of her past. She had moved beyond it, and in doing so, she was helping others do the same. As she sat in her office, the weight of her decision to help others settling in her heart, Samantha realized that she had turned her pain into her purpose. The road ahead would still be long, but for the first time in years, it was hers to walk.